You can't make peace. I mean, let's be realistic here. You can't make peace when someone has been so nefarious, in my opinion, so like horrible, because everyone made out well.
Hollywood tried to shrink this into a rumor, a creative difference, a story not worth revisiting, but it was never that simple. Before Rocky, before Rambo, before either man became untouchable, Sylvester Stallone and Richard Gere clashed on a low-budget film set in a way Hollywood never wanted examined. One incident, one decision, and a fallout that quietly followed both careers for decades. Now Stallone is speaking without filters, and the story doesn't match the version that's been repeated for years. This isn't gossip. It's the truth Hollywood learned to talk around. Stallone wasn't just an action hero. To the public, Stallone has always been synonymous with discipline and control. His characters endure pain, absorb punishment, and keep moving forward no matter the cost. That image didn't come from nowhere. It was forged through decades of struggle, rejection, and relentless self-belief. Stallone didn't stumble into success. He fought his way into it, often when the industry made it clear it had no room for him. He was rejected for his looks, dismissed for his speech, and underestimated at every turn. Each no hardened him. Each closed door taught him that survival in Hollywood required more than talent. It required stubbornness, aggression, and an unwillingness to back down. That history shaped everything about how Stallone worked, including how he handled conflict. When he felt disrespected, dismissed, or undermined, he didn't always respond quietly or diplomatically. For someone who had clawed his way up from nothing, respect wasn't optional. It was currency, and when that currency felt threatened, the reaction could be explosive. This wasn't the calculated fury of a movie villain. It was the reflex of someone who believed, often correctly, that no one was coming to save him if he lost control of the situation. Nowhere is that mindset more visible than in the feud that began long before Rocky, long before Rambo, before Stallone was a household name or a bankable star. This wasn't a clash between two powerful celebrities protected by fame. It was a collision between two hungry actors, both trying to secure a future in an industry that chews through ambition without apology. At that stage, there were no safety nets, no legacy roles, no room for error. One bad impression could follow you for years. The man on the other side of that collision was Richard Gere. Today, both men are legends, their careers studied, celebrated, and dissected. But in the early 1970s, they were just two young actors sharing a low-budget set, each convinced that this project might be the one that changed everything. Stallone saw the film as personal, almost autobiographical, a chance to prove he was more than just another struggling performer. Gere arrived with a different background, a different approach, and a different sense of himself as an artist. Neither was wrong, but they were incompatible. What happened on that set wasn't just a disagreement or a personality clash. It was a pressure cooker moment created by ambition, ego, insecurity, and fear. And the fallout from that moment didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. It ignited a feud that would linger quietly in Hollywood's memory, resurfacing in interviews, anecdotes, and half-acknowledged truths for decades to come. Because before Stallone became a symbol, before Gere became an icon, they were just two men trying to survive. And sometimes, survival leaves scars that fame can't erase. Two hungry actors, one volatile set. In the early 1970s, Hollywood was crowded with talent and brutally short on patience. The studio system had little interest in nurturing potential. If you weren't already a proven name, you were disposable. Casting offices were flooded with hopeful actors, willing to take anything just to stay visible. And the distance between working steadily and disappearing entirely could be as small as one failed project. For Sylvester Stallone, this wasn't an abstract reality. It was daily life. Stallone wasn't chasing fame yet. He was chasing survival. Stability mattered more than recognition. Every role carried weight because there was no guarantee another would follow. He had already experienced rejection in its rawest form, dismissed for his looks, his speech, and his unconventional presence. Hollywood hadn't made space for him, so he was trying to carve it out himself. In that mindset, nothing felt casual. Every opportunity felt like it could be the last one. That's when the Lords of Flatbush came along. On the surface, it was a modest period drama set in 1950s Brooklyn, centered on a tight-knit group of working-class young men navigating loyalty, masculinity, pride, and the unwritten rules of the street. It wasn't a prestige project, and it wasn't backed by a major studio push. But for Stallone, it was far more than a paycheck. He didn't just act in the film, he co-wrote it. The characters weren't imagined from a distance. They were drawn from lived experience. The dialogue, the swagger, the tension between vulnerability and toughness all echoed the world Stallone had grown up in. This wasn't just another job on his resume. It was an attempt to be seen not only as an actor, but as a creative force. A statement that he understood the stories he was telling because he had lived versions of them himself. That personal investment raised the stakes. When something is yours, you protect it differently. Criticism feels sharper. Interference feels threatening. Control becomes essential. Richard Gere entered the project from a very different place. He had a background in theater, formal training, and a methodical approach to performance. Gere believed in preparation, precision, and internal logic. He analyzed scenes carefully, breaking down motivation and intention before stepping in front of the camera. He was cast as Chico Terrell, one of the film's central figures, and he took the role seriously. On paper, there was no reason the two men couldn't coexist. They were both young, ambitious, and committed to the work. But ambition doesn't always align, especially when it's fueled by different philosophies. Stallone worked from instinct, reacting in real time, letting emotion drive his performance, even if it meant rough edges. Gere preferred control, believing that discipline and structure produced consistency. Neither approach was wrong, but they were fundamentally incompatible. The contrast was immediate. Stallone felt Gere overthought scenes that were meant to feel raw. Gere felt Stallone was impulsive, uninterested in refinement. Small disagreements began to stack. Notes turned into friction. Friction turned into tension. And the set itself offered no relief. The film's limited budget and tight schedule meant there was little room to slow down, recalibrate, or mediate. Pressure magnified everything. Crew members noticed the shift. Conversations became cautious. Energy changed. What should have been a collaborative environment slowly fractured into quiet sides, with people adjusting their behavior to avoid igniting further conflict. The tension wasn't loud, but it was constant, hanging over the set in a way that made every interaction feel heavier than it should have been. This wasn't a clash of stars protected by fame. It was a collision between two men who both felt they had something to lose. In that kind of environment, even small moments can carry disproportionate weight. And on this set, the pressure was building toward something inevitable. It didn't take long for that tension to boil over. The mustard incident that changed everything. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine moment between takes. The cast was seated inside a car, running lines and preparing for the next scene. It was after lunch, and everyone had grabbed quick sandwiches from craft services. Nothing elaborate. Just basic food to get through a long shooting day. Richard Gere was sitting next to Stallone, eating a sandwich loaded with mustard. At some point, a blob of mustard dropped from Gere's sandwich and landed on Stallone's pants. On its own, the incident was insignificant. A stain, an accident, something easily brushed off. But this wasn't happening in a vacuum. Weeks of tension, clashing personalities, and creative disagreements had already set the stage. According to multiple accounts, Stallone reacted instantly. Without warning, he drove his elbow into Gere, striking him in the head, then physically shoved him out of the car. Gere reportedly hit the pavement hard. The crew froze. For a moment, no one knew if this was part of the scene or something else entirely. It became clear very quickly that it was real. Filming stopped. The mood on set changed permanently in that moment. This wasn't just an argument anymore. It was a liability. After the incident, the director and producers were forced to make a choice. Keeping both actors meant accepting constant tension and potential delays. Removing one meant reshoots, budget issues, and uncomfortable explanations. They chose to remove Richard Gere. His scenes were reshot with another actor. The official explanation given to the public was creative differences, a phrase Hollywood has long used to mask uncomfortable truths. But everyone involved understood what had really happened. For Gere, it was humiliating. He didn't lose the role because of poor performance or lack of talent. He was fired because of a physical altercation triggered by a minor accident and a major clash of personalities. In an industry where reputation is everything, that kind of exit can linger. For Stallone, the outcome reinforced his position. To some, he was the alpha, the creator protecting his work, unwilling to tolerate what he perceived as disruption or disrespect. To others, he was volatile, impulsive, and aggressive under pressure. Both interpretations followed him. That moment became part of Hollywood lore, even as it was rarely discussed openly. Not long after The Lords of Flatbush, Stallone's life changed forever. He wrote and starred in Rocky, a film that turned him into a global star overnight. The underdog story mirrored his own journey, and audiences embraced him completely. Soon after came Rambo, cementing his status as one of the most recognizable action stars in the world. Richard Gere's rise took longer, but it was just as significant. He eventually broke through with films like American Gigolo, An Officer and a Gentleman, and Pretty Woman, becoming a defining romantic lead of his era. He cultivated an image very different from Stallone's, smooth, composed, and introspective. Despite their success, the story of their early clash never disappeared. Stallone would occasionally reference it in interviews, sometimes joking, sometimes hinting at deeper frustration. Gere, for the most part, stayed silent. The feud never found closure. They never worked together again, and Hollywood never forgot. What makes this story endure isn't the severity of the incident, but how small the trigger was. A sandwich, a stain, a bad day. Yet it altered careers, relationships, and reputations. Stallone has never denied the incident. In later years, he's spoken about it with blunt honesty, acknowledging the clash and his reaction. At 79, his willingness to revisit these moments feels less like confession and more like reflection. He's not rewriting history, he's reclaiming it. To Stallone, the incident represents a time when he had everything to lose and nothing to cushion the fall. The pressure was immense, the stakes were personal, and his reaction, while extreme, came from a place of survival. From brotherhood to fallout. Stallone versus Bruce Willis. By the time 2010 arrived, Sylvester Stallone was no longer just a movie star. He was an institution. Decades of box office success, cultural relevance, and genre-defining characters had elevated him into a category few actors ever reach. The same was true for Bruce Willis. Together, they represented the golden age of action cinema, men whose names alone could sell a movie. For a time, Stallone and Willis weren't rivals. They were peers, friends, or at least trusted colleagues. They moved in the same circles, shared similar career arcs, and understood the pressures of staying relevant in an industry that constantly looks for the next younger face. That shared understanding is what made their eventual fallout so unexpected. The breaking point wasn't personal drama or creative disagreement. It was business. In 2010, Stallone launched The Expendables, a project that was deeply personal to him. He wasn't just starring in the film. He wrote it, directed it, and shaped its vision. The concept was simple but powerful. Bring together aging action legends and give audiences a nostalgic return to the kind of explosive, unapologetic action films that defined the 1980s and 1990s. Bruce Willis was part of that vision from the start. His character, Mr. Church, appeared briefly in the first two films, but his presence added credibility. He was one of the few actors who could stand beside Stallone as an equal. The first Expendables film was a success, pulling in over $270 million worldwide. The sequel did even better. By the time The Expendables 3 entered development, Stallone wanted to expand the franchise further. Bigger cast, bigger scale, more legends. Everything was moving smoothly until negotiations began for Willis's return. According to multiple reports, the role would require 4 days of filming. A limited commitment, but when Stallone's team reached out, Willis reportedly demanded $4 million for those 4 days of work, $1 million per day. In Hollywood, high salaries aren't unusual, but this project had always been positioned differently. Stallone envisioned The Expendables as a collaborative tribute, a celebration of shared history. Many actors involved accepted lower pay in exchange for being part of something meaningful. To Stallone, Willis's demand wasn't just expensive. It felt symbolic. It clashed with the spirit of the project. Stallone refused. Instead of negotiating further, he made a decisive move. He removed Willis from the film and replaced him with Harrison Ford, who reportedly accepted the role without complications and brought a cooperative energy to the set. But Stallone didn't stop there. In a rare moment of public bluntness, he took to social media and referred to Willis as greedy and lazy. The comment sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Disputes like this are usually handled quietly. Stallone chose transparency. Willis never responded publicly. The silence shaped the narrative. Media outlets picked up the story. Fans connected the dots. Industry insiders whispered. The Expendables 3 still earned over $200 million worldwide. But something had shifted. The sense of camaraderie that defined the first two films felt diminished. The fallout became a cautionary tale. Not about villains or heroes, but about how money can fracture even long-standing professional relationships. Stallone had chosen principle over peace. And once again, he showed that when lines were crossed, he didn't hesitate to act. Trust broken. Stallone and Eddie Murphy. If the feud with Willis was about money and values, Stallone's falling out with Eddie Murphy cut much deeper. This one wasn't about contracts. It was personal. In the late 1980s, Stallone and Murphy were among the most powerful figures in Hollywood. Stallone dominated action cinema. Murphy ruled comedy. Despite working in different genres, the two developed a genuine friendship. They attended events together, supported each other's projects, and shared the rare bond that comes from rising from humble beginnings to global fame. But in 1987, during the production of Beverly Hills Cop 2, that friendship unraveled. At the center of the controversy was Brigitte Nielsen, Stallone's wife at the time. Nielsen appeared in the film, and rumors quickly began circulating that she and Murphy were unusually close on set. At first, it was nothing more than whispers. But in Hollywood, whispers grow fast. Tabloids amplified the story. Speculation became headlines. And for Stallone, the situation was deeply unsettling. Whether the rumors were true or not, the damage was done. Reputation matters in Hollywood, and perception often outweighs reality. Instead of relying on intermediaries or issuing vague statements, Stallone made a direct call to Murphy. According to multiple accounts, the conversation was serious. Stallone asked him directly whether anything inappropriate had happened. Murphy denied the rumors. But once trust is questioned, it's rarely fully restored. The friendship faded. They stopped appearing together. Industry insiders noticed the distance. No public feud followed, no dramatic interviews, just silence. Over time, the separation became permanent. Murphy later acknowledged the situation with regret, calling it unfortunate. Nielsen never publicly clarified the rumors in detail, and Stallone moved on. The story illustrates something fundamental about Hollywood relationships. They exist under constant scrutiny. Even unproven rumors can dismantle trust. And sometimes, the absence of proof doesn't matter as much as the emotional impact. The rivalry that defined an era: Stallone versus Arnold Schwarzenegger. If there is one rivalry that shaped the action genre more than any other, it's the one between Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Unlike Stallone's clashes with Richard Gere, Bruce Willis, or Eddie Murphy, this wasn't rooted in a single incident or personal betrayal. This was a long-running competition fueled by ambition, ego, public perception, and the desire to be recognized as the undisputed king of action cinema. Their first major encounter happened in 1977 at the Golden Globe Awards. Stallone was riding high from the success of Rocky, a movie that had transformed him from a struggling actor into a cultural phenomenon. That night, expectations were high, but things didn't go as planned. Stallone left the ceremony empty-handed, while Schwarzenegger, still relatively new to Hollywood, won New Star of the Year for Stay Hungry. According to Stallone, the moment that stuck with him wasn't just losing. It was watching Schwarzenegger laugh and celebrate throughout the night. Whether the laughter was directed at him or not almost didn't matter. Stallone perceived it as mockery. Emotions ran high, and in a moment that has since become Hollywood lore, Stallone allegedly grabbed a bouquet of flowers and threw it across the room at Schwarzenegger. That impulsive act marked the beginning of a rivalry that would last more than a decade. Throughout the 1980s, the two men dominated the box office in parallel lanes. Stallone delivered Rocky II, Rocky III, Rocky IV, and First Blood, introducing audiences to the relentless John Rambo. Schwarzenegger countered with Conan the Barbarian, The Terminator, Commando, and Predator. Every success by one seemed to provoke a response from the other. The rivalry wasn't subtle. It seeped into their films, their interviews, and their public personas. In Twins, Schwarzenegger's character walks past a Rambo poster and sneers at it, a moment audiences immediately recognized as a jab. Stallone fired back in Tango and Cash, where he beats up a character clearly modeled after Schwarzenegger. These weren't accidents, they were deliberate signals. Behind the scenes, the competition influenced decisions in ways few fans realized. Scripts were chosen not just for quality, but for comparison. Physical training intensified. Marketing campaigns leaned into the contrast between Stallone's gritty, emotional toughness and Schwarzenegger's imposing, almost superhuman presence. Each man became the measuring stick for the other. One of the most infamous moments of their rivalry came in 1992 with Stop, or My Mom Will Shoot. Schwarzenegger has since admitted that he read the script and immediately recognized it as weak. Instead of rejecting it outright, he pretended to be interested, knowing word would reach Stallone. Determined not to let his rival gain ground, Stallone rushed to secure the role. The result was disastrous. The film was panned by critics and underperformed at the box office, becoming one of Stallone's most notorious missteps. The realization that he had been manipulated only deepened the rivalry. What had once been competitive pride now carried a sting of embarrassment. By the early 1990s, however, the action genre itself began to change. Audiences grew less interested in exaggerated muscle-bound heroes and more drawn to irony, humor, and realism. Both Stallone and Schwarzenegger struggled with the shift. Stallone starred in films like Demolition Man and Judge Dredd. Schwarzenegger tried Last Action Hero and Junior. Not all of these experiments paid off. Ironically, it was this shared struggle that cooled the rivalry. As their careers entered a new phase, the constant need to outdo one another lost its urgency. By the early 2000s, competition gave way to pragmatism. When Stallone launched The Expendables, Schwarzenegger agreed to appear in a supporting role. It was a symbolic moment. The rivals were now collaborators. They later co-starred in Escape Plan, their first true co-lead project. The chemistry was relaxed. Interviews showed genuine respect. Both men acknowledged that the rivalry had pushed them to be better, stronger, and more disciplined. What once fueled resentment had matured into mutual appreciation. Looking back, Stallone has admitted that competing with Schwarzenegger forced him to stay sharp. Schwarzenegger has echoed that sentiment, crediting the rivalry with driving his own ambition. The flower throwing, the casting tricks, the subtle jabs, all of it now feels like part of a different era, one defined by excess, bravado, and relentless competition. Their story stands apart because it didn't end in silence or bitterness. It ended in reconciliation. Why Stallone speaks now? Sylvester Stallone no longer speaks from a place of ambition or insecurity. He speaks from experience. The urgency that once defined his early career has faded, replaced by clarity. When Stallone talks now, he isn't fighting for relevance, leverage, or approval. He's recounting events as someone who lived through them, understands them, and no longer feels the need to sanitize them. For years, Stallone rarely explained himself. He reacted, moved forward, and protected his projects and his reputation with intensity because there was no safety net beneath him. Every role mattered, and every set felt like a test. In that environment, conflict wasn't theoretical, it was survival. That context reshapes the Richard Gere incident. When Stallone reflects on it now, he doesn't frame it as a proud moment, but he doesn't erase it either. He acknowledges the volatility of that period, the pressure of being broke, unknown, and desperate to prove creative ownership. Gere wasn't just another actor on that set. He represented a competing approach, a different background, and a possible threat to something Stallone felt deeply connected to. The mustard incident wasn't really about a stain on a pair of pants. It was about control, respect, and fear of losing ground before any ground had been secured. Time didn't soften the memory. It clarified it. For decades, Hollywood flattened Stallone's conflicts into caricature, painting him as the aggressive alpha, the difficult star, the volatile presence. What that narrative ignored was how often Stallone was the one creating opportunities, carrying projects, and absorbing risk. When things went wrong, he was visible. When things went right, the system moved on. Speaking now isn't about rewriting history. It's about reclaiming it. Power, ego, and the cost of survival. What connects Stallone's clashes with Richard Gere, Bruce Willis, Eddie Murphy, and Arnold Schwarzenegger isn't temperament, but power, negotiation. Each conflict emerged at a moment when stakes were high and identities were still being defined or defended. With Gere, Stallone was fighting for authorship and legitimacy. With Willis, he was defending principle and creative integrity. With Murphy, he was protecting personal trust. With Schwarzenegger, he was competing for dominance in a genre that rewarded excess. These weren't random feuds. They were pressure points. Hollywood prefers to frame conflict as personality failure, but Stallone's career reveals something structural. When strong personalities collide in an industry built on ego, money, and image, friction is inevitable. What determines who gets blamed isn't morality, but leverage. Stallone has always understood leverage. When he removed Willis from The Expendables 3, he didn't hesitate because he controlled the project. He wrote it, directed it, and carried it. He could afford to make the decision, and he made it cleanly. What unsettled the industry wasn't the removal itself, but the transparency. Naming the issue publicly disrupted an unspoken rule: keep disputes quiet and protect the illusion. The silence that followed his fallout with Eddie Murphy tells a different story. That conflict lacked resolution, not because it was insignificant, but because it was too personal. Stallone didn't need to expose anything publicly. Distance was enough. In Hollywood, silence between former allies often speaks louder than confrontation. And then there was Schwarzenegger, the rivalry that evolved into something else entirely. Their competition shaped an era, pushed both men to extremes, and forced adaptation. What makes their story unique isn't how fierce the rivalry was, but how completely it ended. Competition only cooled when dominance stopped being the objective and survival was no longer at stake. Viewed as a whole, Stallone's story isn't about feuds, it's about phases of power. Hollywood doesn't forgive. It recalibrates. Incidents don't disappear. They're archived quietly, referenced selectively, and reactivated when useful. Stallone's conflicts followed him not as punishments, but as context. Casting decisions, insurance calculations, and studio confidence are the invisible systems where reputations actually live. Stallone's intensity, his reputation for control, and his willingness to confront issues made him both respected and feared. That duality shaped how he was treated behind the scenes. Some collaborators thrived under his leadership, others resisted it. Both reactions reinforced his image. What separates Stallone from many of his contemporaries is that he didn't collapse under that perception. He adjusted. He wrote more, directed more, and took ownership where possible. When the industry shifted away from his archetype, he struggled, adapted, and re-emerged in ways that reframed his legacy rather than chasing past dominance. That arc explains why he revisits uncomfortable truths now. He isn't defending himself, he's contextualizing himself. Hollywood respects survival more than virtue, and Stallone survived multiple eras, genre shifts, critical dismissals, and internal conflicts. Speaking now doesn't weaken him. It positions him as a witness to his own history. Why Richard Gere still comes up of all Stallone's conflicts, the one with Richard Gere persists in a particular way, not because it was the most dramatic, but because it happened before either man became untouchable. It offers a glimpse into Hollywood before success smooths edges and publicists manage narratives. Gere rarely speaks about it while Stallone acknowledges it, and that imbalance keeps the story alive. It invites speculation and allows meaning to be projected onto a moment that was, in reality, chaotic and human. What Stallone exposes isn't just the incident itself, but the environment that produced it. A low-budget film, limited time, no margin for error, and two actors with incompatible approaches under pressure. Hollywood prefers origin stories that feel mythic. This one is messy, unresolved, and unflattering, which is precisely why it endures. It reminds audiences that legends aren't born polished. They're forged through conflict, mistakes, and moments that could have gone very differently. Stallone's honesty doesn't feel like a revelation. It feels like a release. He no longer needs to protect an image built on invincibility because his legacy is established. What's changed is how he talks about it. When he says he respected someone and still wanted to strangle them, it isn't contradiction. It's complexity. It's an acknowledgement that creative collaboration can involve admiration and conflict at the same time. Hollywood prefers clean narratives. Stallone offers real ones. These reflections aren't apologies or justifications. They are accounts. Accounts from someone who lived at the intersection of ambition, ego, loyalty, and survival in one of the most competitive industries in the world. This wasn't gossip. It was consequence. If you want more Hollywood stories the headlines avoided, subscribe, like, and tell us what story to break down next.